can, might, would, must, ought, may, should. Do these words confuse you when you try to speak English? Today we'll begin a series of lessons on English modal verbs. These verbs are really useful in our daily communication, but they're a bit tricky for English learners to get the hang of. In our first lesson, we'll talk about the goofy grammar of these special verbs. Then in lessons 2 through 4, we'll talk about the 3 different types of meaning that they have. Are you ready? Let's dig in. Modal verbs have 2 important differences from regular verbs. First, they don't take the word to when used with other verbs. For example, we say, they need to drive to Detroit. The meaning of need is expressed by must, but it is wrong to say they must to drive to Detroit. Using to is wrong. We have to say they must drive to Detroit. Okay, at this moment I have to confess there is one funny modal verb that doesn't pay attention to this rule. Ought, which means should. We actually do use to with the modal verb ought in this way. Barbara thinks Austin ought to be more careful. Now, about the second difference, modal verbs do not take normal verb endings. For example, we say, Zach says Sarah is able to change the oil in her car. The meaning of is able is expressed by can, but it is wrong to say Zach says Sarah cans change the oil in her car. In other words, no S. Instead, we have to say, Zach says Sarah can change the oil in her car. Just like we can't use S with modal verbs, we also can't use ed. So this is wrong. Zach said Sarah canned change the oil in her car. Instead, we would say, Zach said Sarah could change the oil in her car. Okay, this is enough for today. As you begin to look at English newspapers or email, start to pay attention to how modal verbs are used in ways like this. Also, please join us for our next 3 lessons on the meanings of modal verbs. In the meantime, continued success in your language studies.